Welcome to Forensic Friday.
where we examine the intersection of true crime, psychology, and the heart of being human in the middle of it all. So I have an amazing thing to tell you.
What?
So I went to visit Garrett work, and
Mm-hmm.
I still don't know what he does. He's a data scientist, so he does all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
But I met a pretty high up person in like Space Command
Okay.
who loves our podcast, stayed up all night listening to our
Oh
podcast.
my gosh, that's so funny.
And I was wearing my sweatshirt. And then I met his boss, and his boss said, "We hear about your podcast over here all the time," which just made me so excited, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And then my dad and my son and my husband went to Colorado Springs Comic Con because Gare won
Fun.
tickets. Gare's never won anything in his life. I mean, except me, which good for him. But he is not lucky. He doesn't win raffles. None of that happens. He
Mm-mm.
won 4 tickets. So the three of them went and they wore merch as well and
Love
connected
that.
a couple people there. So thank you all for your support. It's been a really wild week or two in terms of followers and everything.
Yes, I have a few quick updates on merch stuff too.
Ooh,
My sister-in-law, Arliss, wears her merch on her video calls, and some of her coworkers today were like, I recommended my wife to the podcast that you promote all the time because
oh,
my wife loves stuff like that.
and if you like listening, please tell people about us because
Mm-hmm.
we're just not aggressive. We're not going to put a bunch of ads on here because we want you guys to have a
Yes,
good listening experience.
right.
But the more followers we have, the easier it is to keep doing this thing that we love. So if you enjoy it, tell people about it, follow us on Instagram, download our episodes. But we just really appreciate you because we've been able to keep growing and building this thing.
Mm-hmm.
So we are going to get back to Wade Wilson today, which
Yep.
I'm sure the people are on the edge of their seats. I know I am. I have been all week because I was waiting for sentencing, which happened yesterday.
So wild.
But we're going to back up a little and do like a 2 second overview. If you really want to know more about the crime, if you don't know yet,
Mm-hmm.
go back and listen to last week's episode because we really broke down kind of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
But in a nutshell, Wade Wilson is a career criminal, all the things. He's done all the things. He's got an impressive resume, and he also had gotten into drugs and all this kind of stuff. And so on one particular night, he went to a club with a friend. Well, I think he met the friend at the club. I think he took his girlfriend
Mm-hmm.
to the club. They get into a fight. He ends up connecting with two women in the
Mm-hmm.
club and a man. They all go back to the man's house for God knows what, probably meth and sex. I don't know.
Yeah.
All the
Well,
things.
it was to do drugs. The dude was a drug person.
Yeah, so that's what he did. But before that, he actually took his girlfriend's car, like the gentleman that he is, and left her at the club.
Yeah.
So that all happened. They had had this big fight. So one of the theories is that he got angry in this fight, uses methamphetamine. One of the girls who went with them to this guy's house, one of them went home. The other one, I believe, didn't she bring Wade back to her place? Yeah,
Yes.
she brought Wade back to her place. They sleep together. He strangles her and kills her.
Mm-hmm.
And then he told the same girlfriend that he stole her car, told her that he took a shower, had a
Mm-hmm.
hung out. He left there in the victim's car,
Right.
not even the girlfriend's car. Now he's upgraded to this victim's car.
Victim's car. Yeah.
And he's driving and he sees Diane Ruiz. She's walking to work and he convinces her to get in the car with him. And she got in. I think she was trying to be helpful with directions or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. She got in
Mm-hmm.
the car. You never get in the car with a stranger. We know this.
Right. Right.
Um, and he choked her and strangled her essentially, but she didn't die. He
Right
pushed her out
away.
of the
Yeah.
car. She didn't die right away. Pushed her out of the car, runs her over at least 10 times.
Mm.
So that's where we're at.
Yep.
So what we want to pick up from tonight is we want to give you some information about how he got caught,
Mm-hmm.
which actually involved his biological father. So Nat's going to cover that.
Yep.
And we're going to get into some of the theatrics, both in the jail and the courtroom.
Yep.
And if we have time in this episode, we'll get to sentencing. And if we don't, we'll do it next week.
Yes.
All right, girl, take it over.
Oh,
Tell us about Biodad, because I don't know as much about this as you do.
yes. So I went on a deep dive with Biodad. You know me, I like have a one-track brain sometimes.
I love it.
So I just have to like go so far into,
Mm.
and for some reason, I'm just so fascinated with people's history.
And it's not the adoptive parents. He has these, by all accounts, lovely adoptive parents. We're talking
Yeah.
about his biological father who got his mother pregnant when they were 13 and 14 years old, right? That's Biodad.
Yeah. So they were actually 15 and 14.
15, there you go.
Yeah.
Baby.
So I mean, not far off, but
No.
yes. So Biodad actually was on this interview with some random dude that I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's sharing a little bit of their history and a little bit of Wade's history. So what do you know what Wade's name was before he was adopted?
No.
It was Anthony.
Oh, that's so interesting. I didn't
He
see
looks
that.
like an Anthony.
Do you think the adoptive parents, I'm sure they did not know the Deadpool reference when they named him Wade.
No, he's
They
like,
probably just thought it sounded cool, like Wade Wilson, WW, I don't know.
yeah. I mean, it is a cool name,
Yeah.
you know, but his original name was Anthony.
Mm. And
Yeah.
was he adopted right away?
So I will get into that.
Yes.
So Steve is the father's name. So I'm going to refer to Wade's dad as Steve because that's his name.
Okay.
Wade's biological dad. Okay. I don't know. I'll just make this known real fast. I don't know anything about his adopted parents.
I know only a tiny bit from the trial that I'll talk about, but that's it.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah. I just know about that they were a good family, went to church, all the things.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know anything else about them. So Steve, and I don't know Wade's bio's mom's name either. So
I don't
maybe
either.
we can look that up. But they were from Florida. And Steve was actually just raised with his mother and his sister because his father left.
Mm.
So that's interesting, right? This kind of goes back to a little bit of our deep dive into Eminem, some
Mm-hmm.
patterns that we've seen.
Yeah.
So he and Wade's mom like basically grew up together. When they got pregnant, he was 15, she was 14. And the way that he talked about when they had Wade, they really wanted to try. So he like stayed with her. They really wanted to see if they could raise Anthony, i.e. Wade, as also babies. A few months after Wade was born, his dad got into some trouble. And again, he's a teenager, so he goes to juvenile,
Mm.
right? He goes to juvie.
Do we know what kind of trouble?
And he didn't say.
Okay.
He was there for 8 months. So my
Mm.
guess is like drugs or
Mm.
petty theft or something.
Was
You know,
mom using drugs? Do we know when she was pregnant?
no.
Okay. Okay.
So he actually talks about that a little bit
Mm.
because that's so many people's assumption is that she was using and drinking while she was pregnant and she didn't do any of that,
Mm-mm.
which is really, really big for
Oh
someone
yeah.
who really struggles with addiction and has a ton of trauma.
Oh yeah.
So he goes to juvie, and 2 months before he gets out, he gets a court letter basically saying Anthony's going to be adopted.
Oh wow.
Hmm.
Did Biomom kind of make that choice, or was it kind of made for them because he was incarcerated, or?
So Biomom made that choice
Okay.
because, and he said he had a lot of grace for her in this interview. He
Mm.
said, I mean, I was gone for like, 8 months, 6 months, up until I got this paperwork. And it would have been hard to be a single teenage mom to the
14-year-old
brand new
mom.
baby.
Yeah.
She was living with her grandfather, I believe, and
Okay.
her family was really loving. So I don't know a ton of her history. But it does sound like she had family who wanted to support her, but I think at the end of the day, it was the best decision for them to put Anthony, i.e. Wade, up for adoption.
Well, and Bio Dad has a little bit of swagger himself.
Oh, for sure.
So I can see how, this young girl and him fell in love and maybe she got into a faster lifestyle than she expected, potentially.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
he's a lot. I mean, I really
He is a lot.
respect so much what he did, but when you hear him talking, he's a lot.
Oh, yeah. He's a whole vibe in himself. I think you and I would really like him. Like if he's sober now, but if he came to us when he was using, we probably would have really liked him.
Oh, he would have been a great client.
Yeah. He would have been probably one of
Absolutely.
our favorites.
Wade, not so much.
Awful. He would have been
Biodad,
terrible.
I'm here for it.
So it was a bummer because not Biodad, Steve. Steve does talk about that it really made him sad that he couldn't make a different decision.
Yeah.
And, he said retrospectively, like it was probably the best decision they could make.
Yeah,
Right. I mean, they are children trying to raise a child.
absolutely.
So he sees that, but he says, he said at the time it was harder for him to accept that,
Yeah,
he wasn't going to be raising his son.
I get that.
Yeah. Any thoughts so far from you?
No, I just I think it's interesting
Mm-hmm.
when I was hearing kind of the affection, lot of affection from Biodad to Wade on the calls, which I know we're going to get into, but um yeah, I kind of like him. I think
Mm-hmm.
he could be very hard to manage. I'm talking about Steve. Like I
Mm-hmm.
think Steve has been really difficult at times,
Oh, for
but
sure.
there is something really likable and authentic about him.
Yep. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And that shows through in this interview. And he's sober now. I already said that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that you and I both know this sobriety for addicts just really helps them
Oh my
for
gosh.
the most part understand their feelings,
Yeah.
understand some of their shadow sides, all of that kind of stuff.
You know what it does? It brings all the good stuff that
Hmm.
so many of them, like the majority of them have, like really
Hmm.
beautiful stuff. And
Yes.
when they get sober, it just all comes to the surface with this self-awareness and this kindness. And it's a magnetic population to work with. It's like one of our faves.
Yes. Well, I've always said, and I'm not going to say all of them because I have met quite a few individuals who struggle with addiction who aren't
Okay.
that necessarily.
Yeah.
But I would say most humans I've worked with who struggle with addiction are really have beautiful souls
Hmm.
and have really big feelings. And that's part of why they get so sucked into substances
Yeah.
because they don't
Well,
want to
it's a
feel the
little
feeling.
like borderline. It's just too big.
It feels too big.
Hmm.
Like I said, he was adopted by, and you mentioned this too, by a nice family. So the family that Steve and Biomom didn't, I don't think necessarily knew the family. Maybe Biomom did, but
Hmm.
the family was friends of Biomom's parents. Does that make sense? So Wade's
Yeah.
biological grandparents, the family that adopted him were in community with them because they all went to the same church.
So it wasn't a random adoption placement. It really was kind of like intentional in
Yep.
terms of who he went to.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. But I do believe it was closed
Hmm.
because they did not have contact until Wade was an adult.
Okay.
So when Wade was 18, he linked up with both of his parents. He messaged his mom first, probably through like Facebook. It wasn't specific, but that's my guess because that's how most people find each other.
Yeah.
So he finds his mom somehow, reaches out to her, and then she reaches out to Steve
Mm.
and says, Wade now wants to get a hold of him too.
Mm.
which is just interesting. And Wade, like I said, was 18. So that was after he was probably legally allowed to reach out to them.
Yeah.
So for a while, their relationship primarily, him and Steve and Wade, their relationship primarily was via phone. They would just talk a lot.
Mm.
Um, I got the sense, he didn't say this explicitly. I got the sense that there was a ton of guilt on Steve's side.
Mm.
And Steve said, he was like, because the interviewer asked, like, well, was he like normal when he would call? And he was like, oh, hell no.
Oh.
Absolutely not.
So Steve knew Wade was disturbed.
Steve knew Wade was struggled with addiction. He knew
Okay.
all of this stuff. He knew that
Okay.
he was abusive to women. He knew almost everything.
Mm-hmm.
So, but Steve said, he's like, but I got it because I used to be that. I used to struggle with addiction. I used to be in that position. I used to have a million phone numbers,
Mm.
changes, all the things.
Yeah.
So they would talk quite a bit. And Steve would send Wade money, like tons of money. He would pay for his food, he would pay for Ubers. He really just kind of enabled
I was
Wade.
gonna say. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was an enabler. And again, that goes with the guilt, I think, that he had having to give up his son at such a young age.
Mm.
So what's interesting, and you and I got this wrong in our last one. So
Okay.
at one point, so he sends Wade all this money. He helps him out. He sends him food, sends him rides, all the things. Well, then Wade does something, right? One of his many criminal things that he does to and gets himself thrown into prison. Okay.
Mm.
Well, dad doesn't bail him out of that because it's probably too expensive.
Yeah.
But that was when Wade got his teeth kicked in.
Yep. You know what? You're so right because
Mm.
I watched the body cam footage
Mm-hmm.
when Mila called the
Mm-hmm.
police earlier when
Mm-hmm.
she wanted her car back that day.
Yep.
And they talked to Wade. It's giving Gabby Petito. They talked to Wade the
Huh.
day that he did all of this, and he did not have teeth. He was
Yeah.
missing his front teeth.
Yeah. Oh, you should send me that video.
I will.
Yeah, so he got his teeth kicked in well in advance of this whole
Yeah.
most recent situation he got himself in. So what was really interesting that Steve said in this interview is he literally goes, Wade does not do well with men. He doesn't like to fight men. He's a coward to men.
But he beats up almost every woman he's ever been with.
Literally.
Yeah, no,
He does not mess with men, but he got his teeth kicked in by men.
mhm.
Probably because he got sideways with money, which you're going to get into later about his current situation.
Yes.
But that also was a pattern when he first went to prison. Like he would get all caught up in this, like, hustle in jail, and then people would beat the crap out of him because he owed them or whatever.
Well, he owed them money, and then as we've established, okay, when you are in over your head,
Mm-hmm.
and for as much of a criminal as he
Mm-hmm.
is playing more afraid than I initially thought, which I'm going to get into.
Mm.
You cannot play scared in jail.
Mm-mm.
You just can't. And I think what he does is a rookie mistake of
Mm.
trying to get money and resources and power and all this stuff and like have the store. The problem is if you have the store, you got to be able to run the store.
Right.
And if you're scared, the store runs you.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
And the more I'm learning and
Mm-hmm.
observing him in court,
Yep.
the more I think that's a bigger piece than even a psychopathy piece.
Okay, good.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was the whole thing. Going into what you just said a minute ago, right? He didn't mess with men, only really messed with women,
Yep.
right? And what's so interesting, Janine, oh my gosh, this actually kind of made me mad,
Mm,
is Steve knew how abusive he was to women.
he did.
He knew.
He did.
So he would start hanging out with these girls, a new
Mhm.
girl, whatever, and the girl would end up calling Steve
Yeah.
To say, he strangled me, he beat me up, he hit me in the face, right? Like he almost killed me. And like, what the actual F is Steve doing?
Mm-mm.
Not calling the police. All he would say is like, "Hey man, like,
You got
what
to
are
stop.
you doing? You gotta stop." What if that was one of your sisters? Also, he has siblings. He has like a little brother anyway, and sisters. But he's like, what if that was your mom, your
Mm-mm.
bio mom, your adopted mom, your sisters? Like you gotta stop. And he'd be like, "Yeah, I know, it's not good." Whatever. But the dad would like excuse it and be like, it was just really when he would use meth because he would get so sketched out and paranoid, which I get, but also you don't beat up men when you get paranoid.
You and I have run groups
Yes.
of people who are actually high
Yes.
on methamphetamine
Yes.
and heroin because in drug court, that is what we do. We just want them
Yes.
to come in, and you got some standing up, tweaking in the corner, and you got
And
some falling,
laying on the
nodding
floor.
off, and the coffee
Mhm.
cups falling out of their hand. Like
Yep.
when people are in active use, Nat and I actually know what that looks like and
Yep.
talk to them and have experience doing that.
Yep.
Meth does not make you choose to abuse only women in this certain way. That's not the drug.
Correct.
That is
Only
him.
women. Yes.
Only women. The drug is the accelerant.
Yep.
The drug is the gasoline that makes these things so terrible and
Hmm.
violent and all of that. But he is innately anti-woman, misogynistic, all the things.
Yes. He hates women.
Hates
Hates
women.
women.
Loves women, hates women.
Yes.
Has women doing all the things,
Yep.
but hates them.
Yep. And the hard thing was like, before and apparently after he got his teeth kicked out, he's a good looking guy.
I mean, some people think I just can't get past.
I mean, when he's got his teeth, he's got a nice smile.
Yeah, okay.
You know, I think he's good looking. I get the appeal in terms of his face if there weren't tattoos all over his body.
And even with the tattoos, the thing that gets me about him is he has these really present eyes. Like he is not glazed over.
Mm-mm.
He doesn't have like a
Dark
blank
eyes, too.
stare. He
Hmm.
has dark eyes that are present and actually look very directly at people,
Hmm.
which is just interesting. I didn't really expect that.
Well, I think that's part of his charm.
I think so too. I think he's capable of being exceedingly charming when he decides
Yeah.
to within that subculture.
Hmm.
Because that is its own subculture. The methamphetamine culture is it's an underworld. We've talked about
Yeah.
this before.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's a catch there.
Yeah. Yeah. So he's just interesting. Hates women, hates women, quote unquote, air quotes, only abuses them when he's high on meth, which I don't believe at all.
I don't believe that for 1 second.
So I think part of it, and I don't know, I was trying to think, I didn't learn enough about his relationship with his biological mom
Hmm.
to know where some of this anger towards women comes from.
Mm.
But I do know he didn't stay in touch with his mom as much, mainly because she was still active in her use.
I have another theory too. I think potentially active interuse. I also, when you hear
Hmm.
Steve got a lot of personal satisfaction from having a relationship with Wade.
Yeah.
His mom is the one who made that choice. So even though Steve has all this hindsight and all this great
Hmm.
empathetic thoughts about Biomom now,
Hmm.
I can see a world in which
Hmm.
when it first happened, Steve was pretty disappointed that that happened and may have actually been kind of angry. So we're
Yeah.
seeing a grown man with gray hair saying, "Oh, she didn't have many options, blah, blah, blah." But remember, when he was locked up, he was
Hmm.
still very, very young. So even as Wade got older,
Hmm.
when they started talking even at 18, Steve's only in his 30s,
Right.
early 30s.
Right.
So I don't know that that's the case, but I think it's interesting that he's so aligned
Yeah.
with Biodad. I find that
Yeah.
interesting.
Yes, I hear that. So Wade did not stay in touch with his mom, his bio mom, as much. He wanted to.
Mm.
I think what's interesting is Steve also said she did not handle the adoption well.
Mm-mm.
Like it was really painful for her to give up her son for adoption. And his theory is that that kind of kept her in her addiction. And it was really hard for her to get out, probably because of the guilt and the shame and all of that.
Oh, yeah, totally.
But it's interesting because, Steve did get sober, like I've said. It's interesting because Wade would ask, so at some points he would talk to his mom because he would ask his dad for money to send him to where his mom lived so he could run the streets with his mom.
Hmm.
What's your thought? You have a face.
Well, I don't know.
That's his narrative.
I'm
That's
having
his
a
narrative.
visceral response to this. I think,
And Steve would not give him money to go run the streets with his mom. He'd give him money for everything else, but not to go run the streets with his mom.
so he was monitoring how Wade was spending his money?
Well, Wade's not the brightest crayon in the box.
Mm-mm.
Okay, so Wade just tells on himself with everything.
I mean, that's true.
So I don't
Yeah,
think he left a lot for Steve to question. So
totally. But
I'm
money's
pretty sure
money.
Wade would be like, this is what I want to do. I need money for it.
And Dad's like, no.
Yeah, when it came to mom, said no.
I just have never met many people who are straddling these worlds who they don't have the Dave Ramsey envelope system. Like this
No.
is my movie money and this is my this is my dining out money.
Right.
This is my leftover money. It's just not like that. It's like the money comes in and it goes out and it comes in and it goes out in all of
Yeah.
these chaotic ways. And so
Yeah.
unless he was just buying him groceries, the money was getting all mixed up anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and Wade would do the like classic addict thing, like call and be like, our tires flat. We need money for tires and
Oh,
whatever.
100%. And I'm thinking that money may have gone to run in the
Drugs.
streets with mom. But what a funky Bonnie and Clyde situation we have going on, minus the weird romantic relationship that they're just running the streets. But you know what? I have actually counseled a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
in the methamphetamine subculture
Yep.
who
Yep.
end up in drug-related enterprises with their parents. That's
Yes, it's
actually,
wild.
it happens and it blows my mind every time, but it does happen.
Yep. Yep. I've heard that too.
And they
People are
have
like,
their
oh yeah,
kids out there at 14, 15. I mean, obviously
yeah.
Wade was over 18 when he reconnected with his parents, but this is a thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I've had clients tell me that their parents got them starting to use at like age 10.
Or shot him up for the first time.
Yes, which is insane.
I know that's
And
like
it
so
makes me
hard.
rageful.
I know, hard to wrap my head around, but it
Yeah,
happens.
makes me super mad.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So I think what's interesting, one of the big things that I thought was really interesting so far is, and you and I've mentioned this before, is the nature versus nurture.
Yep.
He was adopted as a baby, as an infant,
Mm-mm.
and did not have,
Mm-mm.
I think, any
Mm-mm.
converse or communication with his biological parents until he was an adult.
Mm.
So that's interesting because from what it sounds like, his adopted parents didn't do drugs, didn't have stuff like that around the house, didn't
Mm-hmm.
have people like that around the house. So, that nature versus nurture thing comes into play too with
Mm-hmm.
this, right?
Oh yeah.
So, jumping to when Wade told his father
Mm.
about the murder.
He called and told him about it, and then Wade's dad called police. You're not talking about jail call. You're talking about
Correct.
got it. Carry on.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
So Wade, commits his heinous acts
All in
and
a day,
all in one day.
which is nuts.
Yep. And calls his dad.
Mm,
Okay. Calls his dad while his dad's at work.
mm,
So his dad is basically like, or Wade's like, I need help.
mm.
I need your help. I need you to come help me. And Steve's like, hey, I'm at work. Call me around dinner time.
Mm.
So Wade calls him around dinner time, but Steve's on his way home from work at that
Okay.
point. He sounds panicked. Wade does, says, I need help. I did something that I can't take back. 2 people are no longer with us. Just saying a lot of things
Mm.
that don't make a ton of sense
Mm-mm.
to Steve at this point.
Yeah.
Steve just thought he was quote unquote on one, like on one of his,
Whatever.
manic drug episodes.
Yeah.
Um, and so Steve says while he's on his way home, hey, I need you to just call me back a little later.
Mm.
So he puts him off again. And at this point, Wade has not said, hey, I've killed 2 people.
No, no, no. He's just doing his normal Wade. I'm a little
Yes.
bit bonkers because I'm using meth.
Yes.
Yeah.
So then while Steve's still driving, he gets a call from a detective
Mm.
because Wade calls dad, the first call from the victim's phone, Christine's
Oh
phone.
my gosh, I forgot that part. That is so
Yes.
insane.
Yes. Like
Ugh.
going back to not the brightest crayon in the box.
Well, driving the car, using the phone. I don't know what he thought was going to happen.
No, I don't either. So he gets a call from the detective, and basically, the detective is like, do you know where your son is? And he's like, no, I don't. He's called me, but I don't know what's going on.
Mm.
And the detective basically is like, well, the first number he called you from is this girl's phone, and I think maybe the detective said she died, or I don't know. I don't know everything the detective said, but basically was like, this is some random chick's phone
Yes.
and she's missing or something. So then Steve gets home and he tells his wife about kind of this random stuff that's going on.
Mm.
Like, Wade called me twice, seems different than his normal chaos.
Mm.
And I got this call from a detective. Okay.
Mm.
So then Wade calls him back again at 10
Mm.
p.m., around 10 p.m.
Mm.
And I think he either tells him or somehow Steve found out maybe through the detective that Wade actually has both girls' phones. He took both of them.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. It was not specific if he used the other phone, but he took both of them.
And he didn't like lose his phone. He's just doing this for like fun.
Well, I don't know. I think he maybe didn't have a phone.
Hmm.
Because it sounded like the way Steve would talk about it, and you and I've seen this a bunch when we worked
Mhm.
with drug court. They individuals who struggle with addiction switch phones all the time. They get
They do.
burner phones all the time,
They do. But
right?
they
So,
usually have a stock of them.
well, that was probably Wade, but he
Yeah.
would call from a different number all the time. So when he called
Mm.
from a different number, Steve wasn't like he was like, this is his normal behavior.
He's somewhere with some phone.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Wade was like, said, I need you to come get me. I am in trouble.
Mm.
Also, Wade at some point had broken into some random house, and he's just like held up there.
Thank God no one was there because they would have died too.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Mm.
So he says, I'm in trouble. I need you to come get me. So Steve jumps up and was like, all right, like the enabler that he is,
Mm.
right? Jumps up, starts to get ready, and then starts to slow his thoughts down. And he's like, I need to find out what's going on first before I drive over there.
Yeah.
Like, thank you. So he confronted Wade and asked,
Mm.
again, Wade, he just loves telling on himself. He
Yeah.
starts from the top. The only part of the story that Wade left out telling his dad was that they went to some random dude's house. Yes.
Oh my gosh.
And as he's telling his dad, he sounds like excited. he's getting like off on this,
Oh, yeah.
right?
He's also likely still high.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
I get the sense that whole day was meth, 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 meth. You know what I mean? Like he
Yes.
was
Just
staying
constantly.
up.
Well, he said when in one of his phone calls to Mila, I
Mm,
think when he was in prison, I think it was Mila. It was either Mila or his new girlfriend. I think it was Mila.
hmm
He said he didn't know what he used. He said, I used something and then everything just happened.
mm,
So it might not have been meth. Like, remember when everyone was taking those like bath salts or rock salt or bath rocks
hmm
or whatever they were?
Bath rock.
I don't know what they were.
Bath salts.
Bath salts.
And
And they
eating
were like,
people's faces.
yes.
Oh, that was
I'm
terrifying.
like, maybe he like used some meth and bath salts.
Oh my goodness.
I know.
That was the first time I bought a taser, was when I was doing substance abuse work and that guy like ate that other guy in Miami. They got off the freeway.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, absolutely not. I'm going to have a taser. I'm not going to kill anybody. They're precious. They're people. They need help. But
But also,
I will
don't come for
tase your
me.
ass.
Yes, do
Absolutely.
not come for me.
Oh, that was terrifying.
It was like real life zombies. It was crazy. It was like literally like zombie apocalypse status.
I mean, it was math.
Yes, yes. So, he tells his dad all of the stories. So there's some different opinions,
Mm,
right? In part of this, Wade says that him and the first victim slept together. Other people say they didn't. Who really
mm,
knows? Okay.
mhm,
Says he slept with her, then she fell asleep and then he strangled her. We already went through the whole case.
mhm,
So, yeah, he's talking about this as if he's excited about it.
mm.
So Steve said, he's the one who said, "Hey, where are you? I'll come
Yeah.
get you." And then he sent the police.
Mm.
And people have been giving him crap and saying, "I would never turn my son in. I'd never turn my son in." And Steve was like, "It was the hardest decision I've ever had to make, but I knew if I didn't, he would he would do it again."
Also, can we just talk about the fact that his ass was grass anyway? So thank you, Steve. I really appreciate that you didn't try to harbor him, but also they've got the phone. They know
Right.
that he's got the
But
cars.
the scary thing is, there's another case I'm going to bring to you in a few weeks.
Ooh.
I know, it's crazy. It reminds me of what I'm about to say.
Yeah.
The thing is, though, what could have happened if Steve didn't cooperate and just went and picked him up and tried to keep him safe for a little bit longer
Yeah.
is Wade could have hurt other people.
He might have killed Steve's wife, to be
Yeah.
frank.
Or Steve.
He was not okay. And also, I'm sitting here thinking he might have had PCP. PCP makes people jump off buildings and stuff. Like it's why
Hmm.
you feel out of your body. That's less common, but it is possible.
Yeah. He was on something gnarly.
Yes,
Um, but I mean, history says that he still abused women while he was on meth. So,
absolutely.
but yeah, so I appreciate that Steve, yes, his ass was grass. However, the fact that Steve didn't act out of enabling
Hmm.
and acted more out of like, this is really bad
Yeah.
and he's gonna hurt somebody else if I don't s- call him in. Uh,
He probably saved lives, I would
yeah,
say.
I think he did
Mm-hmm.
because Wade was still on one,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
know? So that was the majority of the interview that I watched with Mr. Steve
Mm.
about his son, Wade.
I think you've covered it really well.
Okay. So then one other point that I'm going to make, again, going off of Wade telling on himself. So he tells on himself to his dad, and he also tells on himself to Mila
Mm. That
while
was when he was in
they're,
jail, right?
yep. Yes. Like he's like, he already knows, I'm going to use your phrase. He already knows his ass is grass.
His ass is
So
grass.
he's basically like, I just hope they don't kill me.
Yeah.
I hope I don't get the death penalty.
Yeah.
And basically he's like, talks about how much he loves Mila and
Mm.
I'm so sorry that, this impacted you, but think about how much it impacted me. Like he's
Oh,
just something special.
oh
Um,
yeah.
yeah, so he focused it was almost painful listening to some of those calls.
All the calls are painful. I listen to
Oh,
all kinds of calls.
I same. You and I
Calls
probably
with
listened to some of
men,
them.
calls with women. I
Oh
mean,
yeah, see, I didn't get that far. I just listened to the ones with Mila.
oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's what I got for us for some of his history and kind of where he came
Mm,
from a biological standpoint.
mm. Wow.
I
You
know.
did. You went deep. I didn't know most of that
I
stuff,
know.
actually. I'm going to take us into the trial a little bit more.
Sweet.
But I wanted to mention, because I mentioned this before, and I think it's kind of important because it's brain bending and it's been really frustrating to the victims' families,
Hmm.
um, and to Mila. One of the things Mila said is she feels failed by law enforcement to a degree as well.
Yeah.
So Mila called police, said he assaulted her in the parking lot of her business, and he'd taken her car from the bar the night before and stranded her there, right? So she calls the police. This is before he killed
Hmm.
these two women.
Mm.
There's body cam footage of him in this car looking not well. He's
Mm.
shirtless, a little bit toothless, and he's just wide-eyed and he is not okay.
Hmm.
And I'm sorry, law enforcement knows when people are high.
Right.
You. I mean, and meth is not a subtle high. It is a,
Right.
hi, I'm on meth kind of high.
Right.
And so he actually drove away from the cops. It wasn't like a chase. I don't know if he was allowed to leave. I wasn't able to find all the details, but police had an interaction with him and he ended up driving away.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Jeez Louise.
So there's that. Okay, let's go to court.
Okay. Take a
Okay.
sip.
So as we established, Wade tells all to bio dad before he was incarcerated. Then when
Hmm.
he's in jail, pretty quickly, I mean, he had not been in jail very long.
Right.
He tells Mila. He tells Mila, and he's immediately coordinating. I need money on my books. I need messages in my kiosk. He's getting his crew together so that he can have all of the people to talk to. And
Right.
listening to him talking on the phone, it's so aggravating to me on so many levels because
Mm.
he is operating with everybody, even men. He's telling men that they're his person.
Hmm.
So there's some interesting stuff going on there. I don't know if he's interested in men and women. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. But he's
Right.
having very flirtatious, very charismatic conversations, and he is driving them to do things for him.
Mm.
And I mentioned to you about the charges he got while he was in jail with drugs.
Hmm.
Well, I dug into that a tiny bit more because I was very curious. Like, what
Right.
happened? I know Wade's probably one of the ringleaders
Hmm.
because he may not be the brightest bulb, but he does have the charm factor.
Yep.
Okay. So the way that he got busted for narcotics, first of all, he overdosed on fentanyl in jail. That is a thing that happened at some point before the trial. So he was
Hmm.
getting narcotics in the jail, which we know people do. Okay.
Hmm.
What not everyone does is get involved in a massive operation to import drugs into the jail. That is what
Hmm.
Wade did.
Hmm.
So there was someone on the outside that Wade was communicating with. Actually, there were about
Mm.
three people outside of the jail, but one in particular that they zeroed in on.
Okay.
So they did an undercover investigation and they watched someone who was talking to Wade,
Hmm.
and they ended up arresting six people. Three in the jail, three out of the jail. Yes, you can be arrested in jail and charged with all the things.
Right.
But what happened, this is the part you're going to find interesting from a manipulation perspective.
Okay.
How all of this happened with the drugs. How the drugs got into the jail is it was a trustee, which we know
Mm-hmm.
those are inmates who have special privileges because they've been trustworthy.
Mm-hmm.
The trustee, right?
Right.
And they've typically been fairly responsible. So what
Uh-huh.
happened is the drugs would come in,
Mm-hmm.
one trustee would give the drugs to another trustee. Okay, so now we have two trustees involved
Okay.
who then pass the drugs to Wade and another inmate.
Interesting.
So it was a little bit of a sting operation. So they found the drugs outside of the jail, but there were also already drugs circulating in the jail.
Okay. And this is his current stint in jail.
Current stint.
Okay, okay.
Yep, current stint in jail. Basically, with the escape, I did some digging on that because I was like, what's he doing? Because I
Mm-hmm.
told you how bizarre that all is. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, an inmate is the one who told
Mm-hmm.
guard because Wade told him, we're going to need a ride out of here at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning today or tomorrow.
Right.
Okay. And what the inmate said was that they were related through the prison gang, the Unforgiven, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the thing that's interesting to me about that from a psychopathy perspective, in my training, this guy told a story of a prison in Canada, a really remote prison in Canada, the
Okay.
trainer. And he studies psychopaths. He goes into prison and he talks to them. And they're very impulsive. They
Okay.
don't plan things out. They're not necessarily dumb. Some of them are really smart, but they
Right.
tend to be fairly impulsive and they get these ideas, these really creative ideas, but they don't always think about what they're going to do.
Right.
So they bust out of jail.
Okay.
They
God.
managed to coordinate a helicopter. They got picked up in a helicopter.
Uh-huh.
Another psychopath, so there were two psychopaths that coordinated, and then like two other inmates were trying to escape altogether. They
Oh.
managed to get out and get to the helicopter. Okay.
What?
Yeah. Yes.
That was crazy.
Another diagnosed psychopath sees them running and going to the helicopter, and they go too. They're like, I'm in. Like, I don't know where you're
Right.
going, but I'm going with you, which is also
Right.
kind of wild.
Yes.
This looks sophisticated. I mean, you got a helicopter, like all the things, right?
Yep.
So they're flying around while they're in the wilderness. And there's a big lake. And there's nowhere to put the helicopter down except on the eyeless island in the big lake.
Okay.
They
Oh God.
couldn't get very far.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, partially because they had an extra person who decided to come along last minute, right? That's part of it.
Uh-huh.
Wouldn't you know? They're searching all this terrain because the helicopter eventually took off, right? They're
Right.
searching this terrain for these guys. Well, they start a fire. They start a fire
Because they're cold.
on an island in the lake next to the mountain by the prison that they escaped from. So his point was they can be pretty savvy on the front end. They get a lot of energy. They get these great ideas. And then things just fall apart in spectacular fashion. And we
I was
see
gonna
this
say, like,
over
they
and
got
over
out
again.
of there, so there was some brain power, and then the brain power just shut off.
Just, we're just going to go to this island, build a fire, and oh my
Call it a
God,
day.
they found us. Just like unbelievable.
Right.
So anyway, it reminds me of that a little bit that they
Yeah.
had this idea, and it's like, is anybody going to notice that the stool is no longer bolted to the floor? Like, there's cracks in the glass, like things are happening.
Right. Right.
So anyway, there's that.
Okay.
Okay. So in court, things do not go well for Wade. He did not testify.
Okay.
They have all the evidence as we've established, including his
Right.
confession to multiple people. Okay.
Right.
There are victims in the courtroom. Mila was there a couple of the days wearing purple for domestic violence awareness with some of her friends. So this was kind of a media circus, but there wasn't a lot to see just in the sense that they had an open and shut case. There wasn't a lot of controversy in this case. He did it.
Yeah. Yeah.
The
100%.
controversy came in, what is the sentence going to be? Where are we going to land?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I should mention too, leading up to the trial, as we've discussed, he is working it with all of
Mm.
these people. So instead of like putting effort, like you said, into covering his tattoos, maybe having a victim impact statement,
Yeah.
maybe just doing something
Yeah.
that would be pro-social. Instead, he's reading his fan mail. He got over 3,900 messages from women and fans just since June 12th.
That's stupid.
It's so dumb.
That makes me
He
so
got
mad.
65 letters in the mail. He accepted 279 connection requests and
Wow.
sent 754 photos, and 163 of those were rejected due to being of an inappropriate nature.
Wow.
Yes. So when he rolls into court and he's riding this kind of high of connecting with all of these people, when he gets into court, things start to get kind of real.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that you see is he's smirking a fair
Mm-hmm.
bit. And you
Mm-hmm.
might think he's smirking, he's unbothered, like a
Right.
psychopathic smirk,
Right.
except his foot's also tapping. His
So
foot,
anxiety.
he's stressed and he's taking deep breaths. He's silent, but he's taking deep breaths. Every once in a while, he leans over and talks to his female attorney. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I would not sit within 10 feet.
Right.
We posted those pictures, and the cops behind him are always kind of like, oh my gosh, if
Yeah.
shit gets real, like I'm running. Kind of like me with the red button. What?
Right.
This is not for me. Someone else come solve this problem.
Right.
So he's very quiet. The courtroom is described as being really quiet
Mm.
for a lot of it because they were describing these really brutal killings and what happened
Mm-hmm.
to these women. And the prosecutors keep coming back to he silenced them. He was using power and control and violence for years. This was not
Mm-hmm.
new. It's not like he took PCP and acted totally out of character. This is his
Right.
character. He just happened to kill someone.
Right.
And truly, we actually don't even know if this is the first time. I'm just
Mm.
putting that out there.
Yeah.
But
His dad said in his interview that it was that he killed someone.
before
No, I'm sorry. His dad said he's never killed someone before.
that, this was the worst thing he
Yes, this
did.
is the
Yeah.
first time that he actually has killed someone.
Oh yeah. So Wade's poor attorneys are sitting there with him. They look wildly uncomfortable most of the time.
Well, the older male one, like consistently looks at him like he's insane.
I think he wanted to punch him in the face because
Well, we
at one
saw, I was
point
like,
he saw the side of his head. He
yes,
looks
and
at the
his
tattoo
face.
and he just shakes his head like
Yes.
this is a fight we are not going to win.
Yep.
You know?
Like
And
we're in the grave already.
the attorneys had supporters and petitions signed by thousands of people that are against the death penalty. All of these things happen, right? Because that is the consequence that was on the line during the trial.
Mm-hmm.
So, what ends up happening is the jury finds him guilty and
Mm-hmm.
he's convicted for both the murder of Melton and the murder of Ruiz. Okay. 9 out of 12 jurors recommended the death penalty for the murder of Melton. 10 out of 12 recommended the death penalty for the murder of Ruiz.
Mm-hmm.
So the jury says he's guilty. Here's what we think should happen. And it's rare. It's rare to get a death penalty
Yeah.
recommendation.
Right.
So what I didn't know, and I went into all of the Florida laws because I got
Mm-hmm.
really curious. So
Interesting.
DeSantis passed a very controversial law in April of 2023.
Okay.
And what that law says is instead of a unanimous decision of a jury
Mm-hmm.
to have a death sentencing, you only need to have an 8-4 vote. You have to have 8 for the death penalty. You can have up to 4 opposed, and they will uphold the death penalty.
Dang.
That is a massive change from it
Mm-hmm.
being unanimous to being 8-4. And this is a Florida thing. This is not a national thing. This is very much a Florida thing.
Right.
Okay. So in Florida, if you get the death penalty, you get to choose your own adventure. You get to choose electrocution or lethal
No.
injection. You get to choose those things. And
Okay.
then you have one other thing that happens before you find out what's going to happen. You're either going to get life in prison or the death sentence.
Right.
You can have what's called a Spencer hearing.
What does that mean?
I had to know, so I looked it up.
Good.
A Spencer hearing is the last ditch effort that a defense team can put forth with more evidence that might sway the judge away from the death penalty. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, what the defense decided to do was find an expert on the brain. So, Wade, in the last week, got an MRI, he got a CAT scan. They did all this stuff with the brain. And what they were trying to prove was that he has CTE, a brain abnormality, something like that that contributed to this that's beyond his control.
Right.
So when these things happen, and I don't know,
Mhm.
now have you ever been a expert witness in a case or a witness in a case?
Yeah. Yeah.
I've done it just a couple times, not a ton of times.
Yeah.
In huge cases like this, what happens is the defense hires an expert, and then the prosecution also has uh, an expert, and they
Right.
get to cross-examine each one also. So both say their opinion, both get cross-examined.
Right.
So Dr. Rubino was the defense I believe it was a neuropsychologist,
Uh-huh.
neurologist or a neuropsychologist.
Uh-huh.
And basically, Dr. Rubino had about 1 week to figure out what the heck is going on with Wade Wilson's
Oh
brain.
my
So
gosh.
I don't envy his job,
No.
but also you have to know if you're an expert for either side.
Mm-hmm.
There is money changing hands. I'm not saying people aren't telling the truth. I'm just saying whenever you have attorneys and money and any professional getting up there, things can sometimes get a little bit wild.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think people overtly lie, but I think sometimes things get omitted, or maybe we put a little more emphasis here to help the message either
Mm-hmm.
way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Dr. Rubino basically says he had cognitive and emotional dysfunction
Mm-hmm.
due to atrophy of the frontal lobe,
Mm-hmm.
and he put forth that the right ventricle is larger than the left. Okay.
Interesting.
The prosecution puts forth Dr. Coyne,
Okay.
who's the deputy chief medical examiner in that county,
Okay.
who examined the brain and found no atrophy.
Oh.
And they went deeper into the file. So Dr. Rubino didn't do his homework like Dr. Coyne did. Dr. Coyne was ready to go
Okay.
and had an awful lot of knowledge and experience on his side. Okay. So Dr.
Mm-hmm.
Coyne says, not so fast. The nerve fiber tracks in his brain, the hippocampus, the amygdala, everything is normal.
Mm-hmm.
And the ventricles measure the same size.
Mm-hmm.
So upon cross-examination, Dr. Rubino starts backpedaling. I just met him last week. Because they're like, well, how many times did you meet with him?
Once.
Did you read his whole file? Did you whatever? And the truth is, the poor guy didn't have that much time, and that got
Right.
exposed. So it ended up
Right.
not helping Wade's case very much.
Yep.
Now, what Dr. Coyne did say is Wade's brain likely was affected by drug use
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that he didn't always have great oxygen flow to his brain
Mm-hmm.
because of the drugs that he was using.
Yep.
But none of the brain scans align with a typical head trauma, like concussions, car accidents, all these things that the defense put up there. The prosecution was able to say, nope, he doesn't have this, this, and this. None of that lines up.
Right.
One thing that was funny, really quick about Rubino, when you testify, you
Mm-hmm.
really want to be professional.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's important. And I have seen some very unprofessional testimony in my time. I really have.
Yep.
Whether it be in court supporting someone and I'm just sitting there listening, or
Mm-hmm.
I'm in the dynamic somehow. I've seen some weird things.
Right.
This is a massive case. Rubino, here are some of the things that he said, in addition to the things I shared that are medical.
Okay.
Jerky eye movements that could indicate a disability or midbrain disease.
Oh, whatever.
Jerky eye movements, even I know, I'm not a doctor, okay? Jerky eye movements can happen for a million different reasons. It can be
Yes.
medical, biological, it can be a brain issue, it can be a medication reaction, it can
Yep.
be trauma. We literally have brain spotting, which has to do with jerky eye movements due to trauma.
Yep.
Okay. He drew a quote unquote funky square when asked to draw a cube. I can't draw a cube. You know what my cube would look like? A janky ass square. It would look like a square.
Right.
It
Oh
would
my
look
gosh.
weird because I don't know how to draw a cube. That's weird. We don't have people draw cubes. I don't know why he was drawing a cube in the first place. The
Nope.
mental status exam is not a cube. So that's fast.
Nope. Yep.
But this is the best part. Guess what happened to Rubino on the day that he testified?
What happened to him?
Mhm.
He died?
No, he got lost in the courthouse.
Oh no.
You have a national headline grabbing case. You have a courtroom full of real interesting people.
Mm-hmm.
This is this guy's one shot to not have to choose to die by electrocution or lethal injection, and you get lost in the damn court.
You know,
Oh, you hate to see it.
it's just, but it
Oh,
kind of falls in line with this whole case.
it also falls in line with his assessment of things because I don't know. I mean,
Right.
I've never met him. I've never
A
met,
little bit of a dumpster fire.
but the presentation of the evidence was certainly not as strong as the prosecution's witness.
Right.
But to get lost in the court, making the whole courtroom wait for you when you are like the linchpin witness.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is bad, 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 bad.
Yeah.
You know? So that made me giggle just a little bit.
Wow.
Just a little bit. Okay. So then that's kind of the Spencer hearing. That was what they brought forward. And Wade could have spoken then. And he had kind of alluded to the fact that he might speak, but then didn't.
Right.
He didn't speak. Okay. Wade's adoptive parents write a letter.
Okay. So parents write a letter.
Adoptive parents write a letter.
Okay.
Okay. You could hear a pin drop. I watched a video of this. Okay. And I actually think it was read on their behalf. I don't think it was his
They did
adoptive
it.
father who read it. Someone else read it, but they wrote it.
Okay. Okay.
And they were pleading with the court to spare his life
Mm-hmm.
because they still love him and they feel like, quote unquote, a human is still in there.
Mm-hmm.
Like their son is still in there somewhere. He's never going to get out. Why do we have to do the death penalty, basically? Please don't take our son from us.
Right.
Right?
That's sad.
It's really, really sad.
Yeah.
And ex-girlfriend Mila's sitting there with her friend. She didn't testify or anything.
Mm.
Kelly Matthews, an ex, didn't testify, but came out a couple of days ago and talked about how the police failed her because he continued to try to call her. He called her even last year. She had to block the jail's phone number
Mm-hmm.
so that he would stop calling.
Mm-hmm.
All of this is kind of happening.
Mm-hmm.
And the prosecutors are doubling down. They're saying things like, he has the ability to recount events when he wants to,
Mm-hmm.
right? He's evil. He's monstrous,
Mm.
right? Then you have the victim impact, right? The families,
Right.
the victims get up. Oh my goodness. His butt was sweating. Nat, it was sweating.
He had a swass.
He was stressed. He had a swass. He was genuinely
He had a
stressed.
sweaty ass.
When you watch him, he showed no emotion. no emotion when the adoptive parents' letter was read, none whatsoever.
Wow.
He showed no emotion with the victims' families, but he was taking deep breaths occasionally and he was tapping that foot, which clinically is very significant, which we'll get into in our psychology episode when we get into a little more of like, what the heck is actually wrong with this guy? We're going to figure it out.
Right. Right.
We're going to figure it out to the best of our ability.
Yep. Y'all,
Right,
we told you this is probably a 3-parter.
Oh, this is probably a 3-parter. Basically, he was sentenced to death. He was sentenced to death. He does have the right to appeal, and a higher court will review it. And that will likely happen. We all know that death row cases take a long time.
Yeah. I bet you he didn't think he'd get the death penalty.
Oh, I don't think he did. I don't think he thought
I
he
bet
did.
that's why he was so cocky
Oh, yeah.
and just thought he was going to just get life in prison.
Yeah, and maybe get paroled in 20 years or whatever. I don't think he was thrilled to be in prison, but I don't think he's totally bothered either.
Right.
Right?
Because people can still visit him. People are still sending him all the things. Like,
He's already planning conjugal visits.
oh my gosh.
This is the calls, man. I'm telling you, men and women. You're my number one. I can't put you on the list. He can only update the list of people who can like visit or message or whatever every 4 months. And he's got people trying to be his number one, whatever. And I'm like, oh my gosh,
Wow.
that's a choice. That is a choice if you want to hang out with him. Okay.
Mhm.
Interestingly, one of the things that they advocated for the prosecution, even
Mhm.
though he's going to be on death row,
Mhm.
they want to get him treatment, which I find interesting. Also, the adoptive parents came out and said the system really failed him because they actually did have mental health holds. They would
Mhm.
take him to a facility. They can't do anything. And this is the truth. If he came into even where we work,
Mhm.
there is only so much we can do.
Right.
We cannot hospitalize him unless he says he's absolutely going to kill someone, which he wouldn't have done,
Right.
right? We might call the police if he shows up high on meth, right? That's possible.
Mhm.
But I mean, really, as a therapist, our hands are tied a little bit.
Yeah.
We have huge gaps in our mental health system. So he
Yeah.
definitely fell through those gaps
Yeah.
for sure. That kind of concludes jail shenanigans. Well, bio dad,
Biodad.
sentencing.
Yep.
We still have a little bit of heart and psychology to cover, which I think we can get into in another episode.
Yep.
Maybe a midweek mini, maybe a full episode. We'll see how much we have.
I think we're going to have plenty.
I think you're probably
It's
right.
Wade Wilson.
There's just so much. There's so much. And I agree with you, Nat. I don't think he saw the death penalty coming.
No.
And that law change. Okay, so if the law had not changed in April of 2023,
Mhm.
he would have gotten life in prison because the death penalty wouldn't have even been on the table
Yep.
because he did not have unanimous support for the death penalty on the jury.
Right.
And you and I have talked about, the death penalty is a tricky one for me because our system has flaws. It does
Mhm.
some things well, it does some things not well. Sometimes it's fair, sometimes it's not. This guy murdered these women. There's no question.
Right.
He needed life in prison for sure. His only chance of not getting the death penalty is going to be on appeal if they
Mhm.
find an issue with something that blows the whole thing up, either the jury or the evidence or something.
Mhm.
But otherwise, that's where things stand right now. So, what do you think hearing the sentencing and what happened in the court?
So I'll be honest, I'm not super surprised
Mm.
that he got the death penalty. Like
I
I
thought he would get life in prison because the death penalty is not popular.
Mm,
However, it is Florida.
right.
And Florida sometimes, like all states, we all have our quirks, we
Yeah.
all have our own rules.
Yeah.
With DeSantis changing that law, had I known that, I would have been
Yeah.
thinking it was more likely to get a unanimous jury is not easy.
Right. So I'm not surprised that he got the death penalty. I didn't see the twist coming with the psychological evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
So that was surprising to me. But I mean, his offenses were horrible. They were heinous. And I know we all have our different opinions, and I'm not going to sit here and say like I am for or against the death penalty. But someone like that is just going to continue to hurt more people, whether he's inside a cement wall or outside a cement wall.
Well, and my theory going in has been this is a domestic violence offender on steroids, like maybe literally, right? Domestic, really severe domestic violence offender, habitual, who was also on methamphetamine. And I think when you look at it through that lens, I'm not terribly surprised that his brain was normal.
Right.
Because I think he had a predisposition to domestic violence behavior. He has been behaving this way forever.
Yes.
And then you sprinkle a little meth on top, and we had some pretty heinous stuff go down.
Yep.
I want to close with what the family said to Wade on the way out. The victims' families.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so the courtroom was silent. He gets his sentencing. He has really no real reaction, but he was moving pretty quick to get out of the courtroom, which makes sense. A couple of the victims' family members said, "Bye, Wade, forever." And Diane Ruiz's father promised him, "I'll see you again at your execution."
Good.
So they got their words in there at the end, you know? So this is a complex case because I'm sorry, this is a bad individual.
Yeah.
We have empathy for days. We have frustrated listeners, I'm sure, with our empathy for some heinous things.
Yeah.
But this is a very bad situation.
Yeah.
This is not someone who has an organic brain issue.
No.
And so that's interesting to me. So that puts the psychopathy in question a little bit for me. And so when we get into psychology, we'll kind of break that down a little bit. But we have some really good pieces, I think, to review.
I think that's perfect.
Well, I hope y'all have enjoyed this. I hope that you continue to tune in when we get into the heart and the psychology pieces. And again, please, 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 please follow us on Instagram.
Yes.
Like our podcast. Send us story ideas. We've gotten so many.
Yeah, we've gotten quite a few.
And thank you so much for listening. And if you want to rock our merch, man, it is on the website, forensicfriday.com.
I just saw there's cropped sweatshirts for ladies who like to rock the crop top hoodie.
Crop top sweatshirts. I will not be rocking that.
I already bought mine.
Yeah, I designed it for Nat.
Yeah.
I will not be wearing a crop sweatshirt, but I will tell you, man, that hoodie is pretty nice.
Oh yeah, I'm obsessed.
Been wearing it all over town. So we appreciate you guys so much. And as always,
thank you, our forensic friends.
I'm Janine.
And I'm Nat.
And as always, thanks for listening and join us next week for more crime, psychology, and heart.